Doing business in Africa. You can't afford to be without Africa Investor.
What is in the pipeline for Africa? What values are we looking at? What is already in the pipeline? Not everything, but what values are we looking at? I'll go to Dr. Danso. Most investors, they are in the main wanting a collateral. In other words, we look at blended financing, where there's a confirmation either by the state of the existence of traditional financing to grants, whether through rates and taxes, but then the difference, then yourselves, you'll be able to come in. Can you then share with us how it is likely for yourself to use blended finance, and give us one example of a project that you have used blended finance and you have done the investment on it in our own soil, Mother Africa.
Thank you very much, Chair. And again, whilst I love the question and I love all the enthusiasm around blended finance, blended finance was designed decades ago, and it was designed to solve a very different problem. It's got a very long tail that only now, when the financing gap has become so pervasive, that everyone's leaning on blended finance as if it's a panacea. And if the truth be told, blended finance has not really got the depth and the capacity to accomplish any of our goals. So I always wonder when we have these conversations, Chair, are we trying to get orders of magnitude in a broken model, or are we trying to create something new and solve the problem? So I sat on President Macron's Finance and Private Sector Task Force. We had to look at this for the new Global Financial Pact Summit. When we sat down with all of the multilateral development bank leaders and the investors, what we found out was that if you bring all of the blended finance first loss capacity together for Africa as well as for emerging markets, less than 10% of what we actually need is available. So the question should rather be, how do we fix the 90% gap that blended finance cannot? And I think that's where we're really trying to open up our minds to say, how can private capital have a different relationship with the public sector so that we can have more programs, more programmatic, more long-term, more strategic portfolio-based relationships so that we can actually so private capital can de-risk private capital to solve the financing and the investment gap. And I think if we're talking about mobilizing capital for a sector like this, we as I say to my colleagues, we spend 90% of our time trying to solve 10% of the problem and less than 10% of our time working with people that can solve 90% of the problem. So blended finance, just so that we also understand, because I know that a lot of colleagues are leaning on blended finance because we don't really have much else. Blended finance is part of whilst it's good and whilst it's got some transactions done and we can throw some good names around, blended finance also, if not sold properly, contributes to increasing the cost of capital because it gives the perception that geographies that need blended finance are going to have a loss. Even before we've talked about the transaction, we're explaining who is going to take on board the loss.
Doing business in Africa. You can't afford to be without Africa Investor.